Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. And I am delighted to have the honour to speak to this particular motion, even though I disagree with it. I think from the outset, and I think this is a test for future speakers, that if the issue is important to us, as many of us think it is, irrespective of the various positions we come to, then it should be a debate about the issue. And we should refrain from the temptation to weave into it a whole range of other issues that are just distractions. I would have liked to have seen the government maintain its commitment to pursuing a public discussion around the merits of amending Section 18C. That wasn't to be, but I think it demonstrates two things. The first is, even though my opinion didn't take hold or have sway, was that the government did listen to the opinions of others. So I think in the first instance that does deserve proper consideration. Secondly, I think we should understand more accurately the word complication in its proper context, and that if the government took a decision that national security interests were best advanced in the absence of other political debates, then, even though I might disagree with it, with the limited knowledge that I might have about our national security threats at present, I accept that. I accept that. And of course the challenge in government is that sometimes you can't do all the things you want to do at the same time. And sometimes policies and issues have to take precedent over others. So I think we should be calm about the decision that was took. It doesn't mean that the debate will go away. It does mean that perhaps people might frame the debate differently in the future. But all I can talk about is the experience I had over the last few months talking about this particular issue to a variety of groups across the community. I was surprised, even though I disagree, I was surprised with the level and depth of conviction that people who had a different view to me prosecuted that view. And I thank those people that came to my office both here in Canberra, but also who took the opportunity to meet with me, not just in Perth, but across Western Australia, to express their point of view. Of course, in the debate, important elements of the government's compromise were not well understood. The introduction, for example, of a Commonwealth racial vilification mechanism was not understood. I think would have been a powerful and positive contribution to our laws, in the same way as I think the removal of some of those other elements of Section 18C would have also been a very positive development on our nation's pathway to greater freedom of speech and freedom of expression. But that wasn't to be. But it doesn't mean the debate has ended. It doesn't mean that we can't continue to discuss the merits or otherwise of this particular law in the context of our changing community. I'm an Australian optimist. I'm confident Australians can be the best that they can be. It's good to see Senator Peris here. I remember in an exchange we had in question time during Take Note some months ago, Senator Peris talked personally about her experience. And I stood up in this place and I said, I don't understand. I don't have that experience that Senator Peris has. I've had my own experiences. I've had my own challenges. But I want us to be the best we can be. And bringing unfortunate thoughts and bringing inconsidered statements out of the darkness into the community, I think is a better outcome over the longer term, a much better outcome over the longer term. But that wasn't to be. That is where we're up to. I think it's important that the community continue to debate the merits or otherwise of reform to Section 18C. As I said, I'm an Australian optimist. I think Australians can be the best they can be. I think when ill-considered, hurtful thoughts are brought out into the open, Australians respond well. Australians respond well by challenging those ideas and challenging those thoughts. Some senators may be familiar with the case of Nilson dos Santos, which came to prominence just last week. Mr Santos, a Brazilian-born gentleman seeking employment as a barista in Sydney, was refused a job at the Forbes and Burton Cafe in Darlinghurst in Sydney's inner east. According to media reports, Mr Dos Santos was refused a job by the cafe owner, Mr Stephen Hugh. Apparently, the reason given to Mr Santos was that the cafe's customers, and I quote, would not want coffee made by black people. End of quote. Now, what was most interesting was that when Mr Hugh was contacted by the media to investigate the claim, he did not deny making the remark. Unbelievably, he tried to justify it, at least initially, going on to claim that, and I quote, "I think the clients here want local people, not African people," end of quote. He also told one media outlet, "I think the coffee culture is more about white people," end of quote. Adding a further twist to this bizarre and unacceptable story, in my mind, bizarre story, unacceptable story, Mr Hugh is himself an immigrant to Australia, so his claim is as illogical as it is offensive. But that's not actually an issue. Once the case was reported, the public reaction was swift and decisive. There was a case of out-and-out racism, pure and simple. It's a great pity that this kind of thing is still happening in contemporary Australia, but nonetheless it has happened, and I don't doubt that it will happen again. But the incident does represent the very worst elements in our society. However, what happened next represents the very best and goes to my point about the need for ideas and commentary that we find ill-considered, that we find offensive, to be better put in light than kept in the darkness. And the following reactions. Let's have a look. Media reports today indicate that the Forbes and Burton Cafe in Darlinghurst is now closed. Not open, not vibrant, but is now closed. Whether that is temporary or permanent is yet to emerge, but the appalling racial remarks of the business owner would appear to have cost him his business. And that, I think, is an important point. The cafe doors are not closed today because the government closed them. There are no police in the doorway. There was no ministerial directive. There was no court order. The Forbes and Burton Cafe is closed this afternoon because its customers, Australians, when they heard what had happened to Mr Santos, boycotted the cafe. Australians made a judgment when they heard about it, whether these things were acceptable, and changed their behaviour in a way that penalised the action. When previously loyal local customers heard about what had happened, they voted with their feet. This is what I've said is the right way in which to engage the public discussion that has taken place around Section 18C and the Racial Discrimination Act this year. The section of the Act isn't needed, in my mind, because its continued presence on the statute books suggests that we in this place have little faith, have no faith in the fundamental decency of our fellow Australians. I come to this discussion from a simple starting position, which is that Australians are fundamentally decent and possessed of tremendous common sense, which, when called upon, when which required, they use with great grace and dignity. Australians know racism when they see it or hear it. They know bigotry or homophobia or hatred. But as I've said previously, if I'm in a room with racists or a homophobe or a bigot, I want to know about it. I don't want it to be hidden from me. And I hope that I and others, when confronted with that, rise to the challenge to call it out. Not to accept it, not to excuse it, not to politely ignore it, but to call it out. I want those racists, homophobes and bigots, I want them to air their views so that their views can be exposed for the unenlightened, misguided, unthinking, hurtful objects that they are. That the best way to move forward, the best way to have a prosperous, free country is to trust Australians with their freedoms. As we've seen in the case of Mr Santos, who I understand has received more than 20 offers of employment in the past week, where racism and intolerance exist, the community can step up to the challenge. The community can take action and censor the racists themselves. They can censor the racists with their own actions. Australians do not need the heavy hand of the state to tell them right from wrong, and my problem with Section 18C in its present form is that that's what it suggests they do. Part of living in a free and democratic society involves hearing things that we might disagree with or that we might find offensive. For example, when I hear Labor MPs accuse the government of wanting to give the green light to racism, which was the Shadow Attorney General's contribution to the debate, the earlier debate in 18C, I was disappointed by that. I was offended by that. No government in this country would ever want to do that. And I really do challenge people in this place, inside it and outside it, who really do think that the motivations of those people who support reform are because they're racist. I hold some pretty fundamental disagreements with those opposites, but I don't ever, for a moment, believe that my opponents' views are evil. I just believe that on many issues they are just wrong. And like me, over time, they might change their views on issues, as I no doubt will change my view on issues. It is pleasing, however, that one of the new Labor voices in this place, Senator Bullock, shares views similar to mine and others. In his first speech to the Senate last night, Senator Bullock said the following, and I quote, The politically correct place tolerance on a pedestal among virtues, but hold that it requires that all sincerely held views, provided they are not politically incorrect, be held to be equally valid with respect to the holder of them. This is not tolerance, but rather a flawed doctrine of moral equivalence. To be tolerant of your views, I do not need to pretend that you are just as right as I am, but rather to accept that you have a perfect right to hold a view I believe to be wrong, even if I find your view offensive. Senator Bullock has hit the nail on the head, in my opinion. It's a pity that those of his colleagues who brought this motion appear not to have listened to his contribution. I disagree with Senator Bullock on a great many issues. I was pleased to see his reference to constitutional monarchy in his maiden speech. But I disagree with Senator Bullock on a great many issues, and I'm pleased to note, but I respect also his right to hold his views and to articulate them, to hold them vigorously, to articulate them well, but nonetheless to hold them. And when I disagree with them, I will say so and point out why he is wrong, and I expect others to say so and point out why they think he might be wrong. That is the way this parliament is supposed to work. This is the way the parliament often works. It's the way that our society is supposed to work. Section 18C was a great test for our parliament, For me, who's been in this place only a short while, it was an early demonstration how sometimes very important and necessary debates can find themselves, unfortunately, hijacked by the politics of the day. But the Section 18C debate is not going to go away. And to lock ourselves into this idea that there is no better way to deal with these issues is to limit us as a parliament, is to limit us as a community, and is to limit Australian progress. My great hope is that Australia will be free of scurrilous, unenlightened, misinformed comments. Free not because people are scared to say them, but free because we as a community actively challenge them. Actively challenge them. How many times have people in this place seen something, heard something, and rather than stand up and say, actually, excuse me, I don't find that acceptable, challenge it in the light, they politely turn the other way. They look down. That's us failing ourselves. That's us failing our freedoms. So we can do better as a country. We can do much better as a country. I don't think we need this type of legislation in its current form to guarantee that freedom. Instead, I do think that we can look beyond ourselves, have debates about these issues, knowing comfortably that Australians will and can and often do rise to the challenge of being a harmonious nation. It's disappointing the debate has gone. I accept the reasons for the debate having now passed us. I have no doubt the debate will come back again. It'll come back in a different form. I don't doubt for a second that it might come back in a form where it finds support, because some of those rough edges, if you like, of the original proposal are cut off, and we can find agreement and progress with some common ground around some amendments that reflect the country we want to be, but also provide some of those protections to those that feel a little bit more vulnerable, that aren't yet convinced that we can be the best we can be. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak on this bill. I don't agree with the motion. I think we can do better. We should always be open to the idea of reform, and I suspect in coming months this chamber, this Senate, I hope this Parliament, the Australian community will again have an opportunity to debate this issue in another form. Thank you.